Live from Salt Lake City, this is Heart of the Matter, a really great program tonight, especially for our younger, we don't have that many younger viewers, but for people who might be interested in a younger perspective. I'm very excited about this because we have Samantha and Tanner from the infamous Zelph on the Shelf. And anybody who is LDS, that's the picture of the two. If any of you have been LDS, probably, first of all, you'll know who Zelph is. But Zelph on the Shelf and Tanner and Samantha are going to let us in on their lives. They're young. I was 30 years old when the oldest one was born. So they come with a different worldview, different perspective on all sorts of things. Plus, Samantha's from London, so and Tanner's from the exotic place of Arizona. So we have quite the combination of culture clash and all sorts of things that are going to happen on the show tonight. So, but first, I want to show you something that's really important. A week from Thursday, not this Thursday, but next Thursday, there's a premiere, and we want to show you a spot here in Salt Lake City, and you got to come. You got to support this cause. Let's take a look. Hey, you guys, it is June 11th right now as I sit here with Christy Johnson, a guest that we had last July, 3 parts. You probably watched it if you've been keeping up with the shows. But in a week and 2 days, 3 days, Christy and her team and everybody behind her is going to be airing this movie, No Crime and Sin. Show your shirt. No Crime and Sin. Where's it going to be shown? Let's just get to the basics quick.
It'll be at the Rose Wagner Theater,
here in Salt Lake.
Correct.
All right. What time?
The doors open at 6. The program's from 7 to 9, but it'll open up at 6, the doors.
And you're going to be, tickets are $8. You spend that much every day on coffee or something. $8, Rose Wagner Theater, to see a fantastic film, and tell us about it.
Well, it's called No Crime and Sin. It's the documentary about our family's story. And people will be able to meet our Emmy Award-winning filmmakers. And we have a fantastic panel, very special guests that have been flown in. It's going to be a great event.
Wow. Yeah. So all of that's included in the price?
It is.
And there's going to be a panel discussion or individual? There'll
be a panel discussion. It's going to be hosted by and moderated by Kim Fisher.
Okay, a big name here in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Also, the whole purpose is to advocate for?
Change.
Right.
So we're teaching people how to report, enforce, and empower, which creates advocating for change.
And you're talking about any subject or especially regarding?
Child sexual abuse.
Okay. So we have, and I just have to be straight, I'm putting you right on the spot. She doesn't know I'm going to say this. But right now, in our state, and people who are interested in this type of thing, we've had kind of a black eye been given to us because of McKenna Denson. And because a lot of things that she's come out with have been shown to be untrue. Not everything, but a lot of things. Do you think that's going to hurt?
You know, I don't know. Our story is completely different. What makes, the film great also, and our story, is that our father does confess.
On film.
On film, but he's also written letters of confession. So this film, some people have called it anti-Mormon without really realizing what happened in our story. But there is so much mercy shown to our father in this film, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's an incredible story, and the ending's really good, and it gives people hope, and that there is a chance to move forward in life and to advocate for others. So.
Now, this started off as glass temples, right?
Right.
It's now more than doubled in length.
Pretty much, yeah.
And so it's not just glass temples revisited, it's much more.
Yes.
And if you care about the subject, if you care about what Christy and her siblings have gone through, she and I go way back to when we were teenagers. I did everything I could to try to hit on her at the stake dance. She refused me. She refused everything about my advances.
Take note,
and now I get to sit on stage and hold her hand. In any case, again, one more time, Rose Wagner Theater, Thursday, 6 o'clock.
June 20th.
Doors open.
Right.
Program starts at?
It's from 7 to 9, but the doors open at 6, and there'll be a lot of things happening around that time period.
Okay. And one more thing, Christy's going to come back. This is just scratching the surface of this film and what's going on with it. There's a lot more that she's going to discuss with us in a couple weeks when we're going to sit down again for part 4 of Christy and Shawn show, in that order. And we're going to learn all about what she's doing and why it's so important now. Thanks, my sister.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, check that out, June 20th, Thursday. Tanner and Samantha, thank you for taking the time to come over here and sit with me. We've never met. You've been kind over the emails to accept the invitation, and I've seen some of the things you've done. In fact, we're going to show a clip of something you've done that I really love. But what we do on our show is we get to know our guest without me knowing anything about you. I just want to learn about you like we sat down in a coffee shop, didn't know each other, and I want to learn about where you came from, why you're here, where you're going. Want to know about your proclivities as kids. I want to know what you were like as LDS people, your level of devotion to the church, things like that. And why don't you both, we'll start with Samantha, and let's just go through early life, and then when you kind of come to a break, we'll go to Tanner and just learn about the two of you prior to Zelph on the Shelf and its wonderful creation. So,
Okay.
born where?
I was born in Essex in England. It's a suburb of the London area. Only child, and my parents got divorced when I was about 10, so pretty small family.
Parents members of the church?
No, I was raised sort of agnostic atheist, but I was a brownie when I was younger, so I would occasionally go to like a Church of England service to earn like points, literal brownie points, yeah. And my primary school was like vaguely Christian. They would have a vicar come in now and then. And as a kid, I think I always, I felt like something of a fondness for Jesus. Like I was definitely agnostic, but would sort of pray in my head sometimes, like just in case there was anything there. Yeah.
Was there anything there?
No, it would be my answer
He
now.
didn't show up to you
Nope.
as a young child. So in school, grade school, we call it grade school here. Maybe that's primary school for you.
Yeah.
Junior high school, what we would call that. What were you involved in? Were you academically driven, athletically driven? What were you about?
I was not athletically driven. Definitely more academic. Growing up as an only child, I would spend a lot of time reading. So, yeah, I feel like just reading so much kind of made me more intellectual and gravitated towards that.
I see.
And also quite theatric, huh?
Yeah, I did some drama. Was never exceptional, but yeah, like to sing, like to act a bit.
Wow, okay. And then how did you come to know Mormonism?
So when I was about 15, I had a friend who I discovered was Mormon. I think we'd been friends for a couple of years and I had never come up. But yeah, I became friends with him and sort of got introduced to the missionaries through his family.
Took the lessons?
Yeah, thinking that it was like an opportunity to just learn more about my friend's religion. Wasn't trying to join a church.
I see. And so then, how did you join the church?
Essentially just got sucked in through that. I was young, impressionable. I think the fact that I'd always had, I don't know, I'd felt like slightly drawn to religion in my life, but had never really learnt much about it. And was a late teenager, so sort of was ripe for being converted to a high demand religion.
Got it. Did you, and we'll just stay on this for a second before we go to Tanner, did you believe
Yeah,
the Joseph Smith story?
Yeah, so it was definitely, you know, when I first started learning, I could sense that the missionaries were sort of putting pressure on me and felt uncomfortable with that, but at the same time was just so vulnerable to, I don't know, getting sucked in, I guess. My Mormon friend's family is lovely. So I was really attracted to that whole aspect of it, having grown up in a sort of turbulent home. Yeah, so it was one of those things where the love bombing was really effective. It was genuine love, I think, but yeah, and then I sort of began to conflate those feelings of kind of joy and peace that I'd feel being around this loving Mormon family with, you know, what they're saying must be true, and then within quite a short space of time became very devout. Like it wasn't something I don't know, sort of flippantly joined. It became this really important thing in my life. I was all in.
And that was 15, 16?
So I think I had one missionary lesson when I was 15, and then started getting them again at 16, and joined the church at 17.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else to add to that fast cover of your life thus far?
I don't think so. That's the basics.
Tanner?
Okay, so I grew up in Arizona, and my family moved to Flagstaff when I was probably about 10, which was kind of a dynamic shift from being a predominantly Mormon area to less Mormon, more liberal region. And my family was super LDS, so my dad was my bishop all growing up, and big family, 7 kids. And the church was everything. Like, I learned how to reading the Book of Mormon. Our family home evening game of choice was Book of Mormon trivia. You'd get like a little chocolate chip if you could get the answer right. So I was like the only 3-year-old on earth who knew where Ammon fed the King Lamoni's sheep at the water, you know, waters of Sebus, you know, this tiny little kid. So I loved it, and we have, I used to this day love my family, and we all get along really well, and I think a lot of people look to our family as this like ideal Mormon family that's got it all and is like so happy, and so like Sam said about the family that she was kind of drawn into, that's kind of how we were. It was just like, oh my God, this is great, and we'd memorize, we had family scripture study every single morning, and we did the early morning seminary thing, and we memorized the family a proclamation to the world together.
Wow.
And, yeah, just really, really in it. And it wasn't so much about just the association of being Mormon, because there are Mormons like that, and I think part of my parents' desire to move out of Mesa was to kind of get out of the, my mission president used to say, Mormons are like manure. If you get too much of them in the same space, they start to stink. They have to be spread out to do good. And I think my parents kind of had that attitude, like, let's get out of this place where everyone's Mormon and go somewhere else. And because it was less about the culture and more about the core things, that's kind of how I grew up. It was about Jesus, and it was about loving people and serving people. And so, every Saturday of my life was, growing up, was going out and helping somebody move, working in the soup kitchen, because that was how my parents were.
Did you mind that?
A little bit, but as my dad said, it gave me character or something. I don't know.
Character building.
That's what he also said about working for free, so I don't know. But yeah, it was perfect, idyllic upbringing, and I was always trying to preach the gospel. My best friend growing up ended up joining the church. And so now that I'm out, it's kind of funny to see him at reunions and things. But yeah, and as far as other things go, I from a age of tiny kid, I liked making videos, and did that through high school and through college. I started writing because Mormon leaders encouraged me to have a journal, so did my mom, and so I would start doing kind of long form writing, and then in college kind of accidentally got sucked into that, but I guess that's for later. So yeah, always doing different performance, communication type stuff growing up. But yeah, I didn't think much about that, because the only thing that really mattered to me was being Mormon, the one true church on earth, and spreading that to other people. And there were different points. Am I just rambling? I don't know. It's like, you let me go, so I'm going.
This is good.
I felt like I had a genuine, sincere conversion. Like, it wasn't just something that my parents handed to me and that I ran with. I felt like I had the personal experiences necessary to know that God lived, that Jesus was the Christ, and that therefore the church was true. I never got a specific answer about the church or the Book of Mormon or Joseph Smith, but I associated the strong feelings that I had with the context in which I had them, which was the church.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we're going to see in part 2 of our talks one of your films, which is excellent, just superb. I love it, and I think it is great art and very meaningful. I bet it's been misunderstood, but I think I understood it fairly well, but we'll talk about that. So the team, we're just briefly going to say, we have the intellectual side, sort of, and we have the artistic side.
Yeah, I think that's
fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, Tanner's incredibly intellectual.
Yeah.
We say Sam's Zelph and I'm the shelf.
Yeah.
Nice. So one thing quickly, Tanner, you said you had some experiences, and can you, are you willing to explain what those are that helped you affirm that the church was true? They weren't directly about the church, but you know, that God was there, Jesus was there, whatever. Were they spiritual experiences that you just felt the burning, or did some sign happen, or what was it that convinced you these things are true at that point in your life?
Cool. So the first time I can remember feeling the Holy Ghost was when I was 8. I got baptized, and I remember saying, it feels like a candle in my chest. And, you know, it's like a warm, light feeling. I'm sure everyone here's had something like that. And so that was like, okay, an 8-year-old, this is right, never have a reason to question. And then when I was about 12, had different emotional experiences, you know, hearing a choir sing Silent Night and just, you know, stopping and thinking, wow, Jesus came to earth for me? What? And just kind of being overwhelmed by that, especially feeling, you know, teenage years, early or preteen years, feeling very, you know, kind of out of place and self-conscious, and I felt like I had found this friend in Jesus. And then about 14, 15, I don't know, I was really going through a depressive time, just feeling really worthless and sad. A lot of it now I'm realizing was a lot of the shame that Mormonism instilled in me, and, you know, thinking I was a son of perdition because I had a wet dream, or, you know, something like that, where it's just so much guilt for nothing. And so I'm just, I'm a horrible person. Are we allowed to swear on the show? I can watch my mouth. Cool. So, yeah, was feeling really sad, and I read a book that was, you know, talking, regardless, I walked away from reading this book feeling very grateful to be in the body that I was in, to be the person that I was, because at the time I was feeling, you know, I'm kind of slight of frame, and as a kid I was like, oh, I'm so small, no girl will ever love me, and I'm so ugly, and I have vitiligo, so I could, you know, see these white patches coming on my skin and just thinking, oh, I'm just totally unworthy of love. And then after reading that book and feeling, wow, like, it could be so much worse. I ought to, like, spend less time, you know, thinking bad about myself, and just be grateful for the experience that I do have, and, you know, have to come from a good family and to be in this able body, and, you know, all that. So I finally said a prayer of gratitude, which I hadn't in some time, and as I'm expressing this gratitude, I just felt like just this overwhelming, piercing love, and it felt like a laser beam in my heart, and I felt, you know, the words that came to mind were, I know you. And that to me was truly life-changing. I walked away from that saying, well, God knows me, so what else is there? I want everyone to feel like this, and everyone to know that they're loved and accepted, and that they don't have to change anything about them. They just have to accept the love that's already there waiting for them. And so, you know, even as a teenager, that felt very real to me. And I'd sit in church and I'd think, I don't know if these people really get it. Like, I knew some did, and I wasn't, you know, sitting there trying to judge them, because I felt genuine love for them, because I felt it for me. I know if God loves me this much, then surely he loves all these people the same amount. And so from that point on, like, church was my life. And even though it wasn't like Book of Mormon is true, Joseph Smith is a true prophet, because I had nothing else to weigh it against, those things were just sort of implied. And so everything was, okay, I'm going to prepare for a mission, and I'm going to go on a mission, and I'm going to, you know, bring people this love, this transforming love. And so that was really the only thing that I cared about. So, you know, artistic ventures and developing skills and those things, and identifying as anything other than a Mormon felt trivial to me.
Wow. It's fascinating. You usually don't hear, in the many people we've talked to who have been LDS, that many talk about Jesus. You've talked more about Jesus in your experience, separate really from Mormonism than most guests. Usually LDS people, talk about the church and Joseph. And But you just right here have mentioned more about Jesus. I don't know if that still with you or whatever. We'll find that out. But it's just interesting to me that younger generation, you came more around with the Jesus thing, because at my age walking out, it was all Joseph. It was Joseph. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah, by the time we got on the scene, they're trying to switch the narrative a little bit more.
Definitely. They made Jesus Christ big. So did you find yourself, Samantha, engaged with the ward? Did you find your friends there? Did your social group come from everybody who was LDS then?
I mean, definitely not. My social group wasn't predominantly LDS people, but I did kind of assimilate into this ward and develop these real relationships with people there, But continued to have, I mean, all my friends weren't Mormon other than that one friend, so
And you bought in full force at 17. Did you stay full force through those teen years?
Yeah, so I stayed full force until, so I went to BYU, Idaho, graduated.
What'd you study?
We both studied communication.
That's where we met.
That's where we met, yeah.
A class?
Yeah, it was an advertising class.
Wow, really nice.
Yeah, so stayed full force throughout BYU, Idaho. I think about a year after graduating, I got married in the temple.
Whoa.
Yeah, and then left the church about a month after that.
That'll do it to you every time.
It really does.
So we got to get to that part. But Tanner, did you go on a mission?
I did.
All right, so how did that come about? Where did you go?
So I served in Brazil, João Pessoa mission. It's like the easternmost tip of the Western Hemisphere.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I first got my call, I was a little bit disappointed because I was like, oh, everybody goes to Brazil. I don't want to have to learn a language. I just want to speak in my native tongue so I can, preach with power and all that. And I got to the Brazil MTC and stayed there for 9 weeks, and that was probably the spiritual highlight of my mission, partly because the way the dynamic is set up is to make you feel so bad and to put you in such constraining circumstances that then it elevates your emotional response, and any release is like, wow, this is the best! So that was kind of my experience with that. It was like really dramatic shifts in emotion, and yeah, so then I went out to the mission field and was supremely disappointed by the experience. Like, right off the bat, I thought, this is not what I spent my whole life preparing for. Because I was in it for the love, for the real thing, to preach with the tongue of angels and to do miracles and to be these noble, pure emissaries of God. And what I saw was just this sales team, and not just like a sales team, but the worst kind, worse than your Provo Vivint salesman approach, just total, like, they'd go up to kids and, hey, do you want to play soccer in our football field? Well, if you do, you got to take a little bath in our church first, and go get your parents to sign this paper so you can do it. Just the worst. And we were sitting in a meeting with all these missionaries, and they say to me, they asked the question, how do we get people to commit to baptism right off the bat? And I said, we invite the Holy Ghost. And they said, the Holy Ghost is for goleros. And golero, a goalie, is someone who blocks people from making goals, from scoring. So anyone who blocks someone from getting baptized is a golero. Whoa. And the Spirit was for goleros. Because if you're trying to touch people's hearts, that's going to take forever. Right. There's got to be faster ways to baptize more people. Because there was like, a social reward for baptizing more people. You'd get your name in the mission newsletter and be called to, part of the mission hierarchy. And so there's incentive to perform well. And so you see all these people who are breaking the rules and things, who are ascending the hierarchy, and the people who are, trying to do it the right way are, there were times where it would be lambasted for, you must be doing something wrong or you'd be baptizing more people. And so I just got so depressed off the bat, and I prayed, Lord, let me get hit by a bus so that I can go home with honor, because this sucks. And then I said, eventually was like, well, this is my my call to serve. This is my, you know, Gethsemane or whatever. I can do it the Lord's way, even if I have to do it alone. You know, totally eating it up that way. And eventually it became easier to cope with. And I had an exchange or change of mission presidents that made it, that had a little more agreeable tone, and ended up finishing it, you know, feeling good about the mission.
You stuck it out.
I did.
They didn't beat you down.
Not quite.
Any leadership roles?
Yeah, I ended the mission as AP, so.
That's amazing.
The Mormon success story.
Wow. Usually you get ostracized if you start off questioning, you know.
Yeah.
So
thankfully I didn't let the questioning go too far.
Got it. Was that Portuguese speaking? Okay.
Yeah.
So you get off the mission honorably. Mm-hmm. You come home. How were the companions?
I had like 25 companions, like quite a few, and all got along super great. There were about 4 that probably hated my guts.
Yeah, I always have those.
Yeah, all from the same place too.
Wow.
But, yeah. Anyway, good companions overall. I really liked working with the different missionaries and things. So, I got along with most people.
Prior to the mission, did you do any college at Idaho?
Not at Idaho. I did in Arizona. And yeah, even though it was, they call it BYU Arizona. I went to Eastern Arizona College. Oh. Used to be a church-owned school, and still a very predominant culture there. And very Mormon in my activity there. I could, get a degree in Mormon studies just from like institute classes and things. But
so after the mission, you went to BYU Idaho. Mm-hmm. You studied communications, and were you further ahead?
By 1 semester.
I see, because of the difference in age.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so then what happens? You're going to school together, you see a beautiful girl in your class, you see a handsome young man.
I say, nice shoes, she says, thanks, and looks away, and I'm like, well.
Is that how it was?
Which, in my culture, is a very friendly response, but to Tana was rude and offish.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, people, you do have a more...
Yeah, kind of a melancholy vibe, generally.
I see. How did you become friends?
So we were in an advertising class, and we all had to give a presentation, and I decided it'd be fun if we kind of played a joke on the teacher, and so I passed along a note that said everyone has to use this specific word, I forget what the word was, in their presentation, and kind of an obscure funny word, and so everyone's going along and using it until the teacher notices, and Sam thought that was kind of funny.
Oh yeah.
So then you offered me a job.
Yeah, I was the head of the BYUI has an advertising agency, like run by students, and I was the head of the copywriting department at the time. And Tanner's classwork was always incredible. He's amazing at graphic design, copywriting, all of it, honestly. But I was like, you have to join my team, and he did.
Wow.
Yeah. So then we started working together, and then in the class we had an assignment to do some video thing. So we started making YouTube videos together.
Yeah, we were in another class together, and we had to spend something like 10 hours a week working on a social media project. So we started a YouTube channel and just made silly videos. I think it's called How to College.
How to College.
Yeah.
So you've been creative from the get-go.
Yeah.
As a team. Mm-hmm. When did the unraveling begin? And it didn't have to start when you met, we want the facts, but when did it begin in your mind? What were the first inklings? Something's not right with what...
All is not well in Zion.
Yes.
I think mine started a little earlier.
Yeah.
I had a roommate who was a convert, who was black, and he approached me and said, hey, listen, I know you like studying church history. Can you tell me more about the blacks in the priesthood thing? And I said, yeah, I'll do some research for you, which was a huge mistake in Mormon terms.
Wow.
Because as I started digging deeply, I started seeing a pattern of, ooh, that was not a good thing to say or to do, church policy-wise. And so that kind of was the beginning of a questioning thing, because I start thinking, wow, if the church leaders were so wrong about this issue, what could they be wrong about now? If they could say such terrible, horrific, racist things, who's to say that what they're saying about the LGBT community should be taken as a revelation from God? So that started me. I had another friend ask me about polygamy, another convert friend too, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll research this too.
So you didn't know any of the facts about it, really?
Not really. even though if you would have asked me, I would have said, oh yes, I'm very well acquainted with all the anti-Mormon arguments. I've read a Bible tract or two. And so that kind of started it. And then from there, it was just kind of a nosedive. Wow. And started a kind of a 2 or 3 year journey out. And this is around the time we became friends. So as a result, Samantha and I, we weren't just classmates. We also had like something of a spiritual connection. I feel like very early on we felt like we had the same kind of ideals and perspective, and we used to get together and volunteer at the nursing home and things like that together, and so like our spiritual perspective was an important part of our relationship. So we'd talk gospel and talk church, and as we're talking, she'd say things and I'd say, well, turns out there's this thing we didn't know about, and always trying to have a faithful perspective. I was not about to relinquish my faith or anything. Everything I did was because I thought, this is my test. This is what God has put me on earth to do, is to sort through all this stuff so that I can help other people through this faith crisis. So we'd talk back and forth. And
yeah, this was more after college. While we were in college, I think, at least outwardly to me, we were both just very orthodox.
Yeah.
We bonded because we were so obsessed with the gospel. Kind of had like a sibling energy from the get-go, which,
Twins.
I see it in spirit.
Yes.
There was no, you guys were really committed in college. There was no partying on the side. There was none of this thing that...
I wish.
So I just have to say that because, the audience who are LDS was, they were secretly, doing
Oh
this.
yeah, never watch porn, anything.
Yeah.
Like
Just straight up.
I was a executive secretary in the stake.
Wow.
Which was obscene for a college kid with 2 jobs and a full course load.
Right.
But, and...
I mean, sometimes we would break curfew because Tanner would come over to give me a blessing at midnight because a boy had broken up with me.
You got us, Mormons. We broke the honor code.
You broke the curfew. Wow. Yeah. So after college, did any of his you would talk and then he threw some things, did any of that sink in, or did you have the Teflon shield up? Oh, Tanner, that's not true.
So Tanner's kind of, he started talking to me about this stuff when we were interns at Deseret Book after we graduated. And yeah, it definitely affected me. Tanner, as we know, is so articulate, so intelligent that he would talk to me about this stuff, and it wasn't, and I also knew Tanner so intimately that I knew how faithful he was and where his heart was, so I couldn't brush any of it off as, Tanner's deluded or any of this stuff, although, there was some cognitive dissonance where I sort of tried to do that, but yeah, he gave me like a fraction of what he was going through he would share with me. I maybe didn't know the extent of it under the surface.
And what was kind of nice is that, I'd been so indoctrinated that to extract myself out of that paradigm took so much mental labor, whereas Samantha wasn't raised with that. Yeah. So once the pieces started coming in done, she was like, forget it. Sure. And not to say that that was an easy process or a short process, just that you did have an advantage in that regard.
For sure, yeah. It was only about a 5-month process total for me. Again, just because less layers of conditioning, less inoculation, yeah.
So jumping ahead just a bit, do you find yourself completely out, mind, heart, everything out of Mormonism, or are there some vestiges that still crop up and you suddenly think, do I still believe that?
Right now?
Yeah.
Oh, there are no vestiges.
How about you?
I mean, there's little gems here and there that come back, and not quite. Different, just little things, but that aren't exclusive to Mormonism. Things being honest and things like that.
Yeah.
They taught me, but it's not. They don't own it.
Got it. So what's with Deseret Book? You guys graduated from college, and then what? You both worked at Deseret Book?
Yeah. We did, yeah.
Wow. Well, how'd
Where
that
we
happen?
tried to match every day.
We did.
Where? Downtown? Salt Lake?
Yeah.
And what did you do for them?
We were social media interns.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So at that time, my faith crisis was in full bloom. So I was... I'd wake up in the morning and start listening to podcasts about church history. That's when I actually listened to your episode of Mormon stories and was really touched by that.
wow.
It was around, like I said, Christ was such an important part of my Mormon experience. And I remember at various stages in that thinking that the scripture when Mary finds the empty tomb, and she says, they've taken my Lord, and I know not where they've lain him. That's how I felt. Is like, what have they done with Jesus? Like, what all these true, delicious, good principles are never at play when they matter in the church, is what I felt like. And so your interview was another one where probably one of the first times where I was like, oh my God, there's good people who leave the church and who are just as sincere as me. Oh no, what does this mean?
I'm glad I could contribute to your crisis.
Yes, thank you so much.
So, Deseret, how long did you stay there at the same amount of time too?
I think you were there a month.
Yeah.
How'd you like it?
Yeah. It was an interesting time to be there because of the faith crisis stuff. So a big part of our faith crisis for both of us was focusing more on Jesus and realizing, just the juxtaposition between the church claiming to be all about him and then just these practices, policies, whatever, that didn't align with that. So working at Deseret Book kind of highlighted a lot of that stuff to us, and because it showed us how much, Deseret Book is, a company of the church, and everything just operates so much like a business. I remember there'll be things like they wanted us to come in on Sunday for General Conference weekend. And I remember wrestling with that because I thought, well, there's other arms of the church that are tweeting out quotes from apostles and stuff. Like, the only reason Deseret Book is doing it is to help their bottom line. The church itself is tweeting from their Twitter account what's going on at conference. So there's no need for anyone at Deseret Book to be working on a Sunday.
Except to sell product.
Except to sell, yeah. And so we started seeing that stuff and weren't okay with it.
Wow.
Yeah, meanwhile, we're just, I think the church's money issues really came to the forefront of our
I think
struggle
working
there.
opposite City Creek every day was,
So you were right down there then.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Just seeing more and more, wow, this is really just a business.
Yeah. You probably got a taste of that on the mission with the...
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
The stuff rolls in us and grows. So what was the final point? When did you say, in your mind, this thing is not true, I am done with it?
So after we left Deseret Book, you moved to Logan, Utah for a job. And then I, out of the blue, got a job in Logan.
out of the blue.
Yeah.
Just you guys aren't married, right?
No,
We are not.
just platonic friends.
Platonic friend. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, you have what great friends.
Actual Geminis in the flesh.
Wow. both of you.
Yeah.
Wow. It's just great to see two people who love each other like that and are friends and just have life that are moving that way.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
So Logan, Utah, you're up there. Was that when it fell apart?
Yeah, so you can tell the story, I guess.
So this is a classic Mormon story, but I moved up there in October, I think, and got married in March. So a quick situation.
And I was a witness at their wedding.
And Tana was a witness in the temple at my wedding.
Wow.
'cause my
Not a
family
month
aren't
before
Mormon.
leaving the church.
Yeah, so before getting married, I'd been wrestling with these things, but was almost in a more faithful place than ever in terms of Jesus. We were in sort of a Denver snuffer phase where Tana more so than me, but I kind of aligned with that too, where I, really believed that we could see Christ in this life. And I remember in the sealing ceremony, the sealer said something about that, and that to me was like confirmation. And I was happy he said that. But yeah, I got married, had been going through this faith crisis stuff before getting married, but didn't, I guess the only thing was that I didn't necessarily believe that the church leaders at that time were as inspired as they claimed. But I felt still temple worthy because I thought, well, I still sustain them in that I still support them, I pray for them, all this stuff. So even though I felt like the church had kind of gone astray a bit, still felt faithful enough. There's some cognitive dissonance. So got married and then...
Returned missionary?
Pardon?
Returned missionary? How did you meet him?
Yeah, he was a returned missionary. And left the church a month later. Well, Tana left a few weeks before me, maybe I'm getting the timeline a bit off, but it was within a couple of months of getting married. But Tanner left before me, and when he left, it was like, it was like a punch in the stomach, because I knew that Tanner, more than anyone, had truly tried to maintain faith in this thing, and he spent hours and hours a day praying, reading scriptures. He did everything you're supposed to do, and he'd been sort of not an authority, but like I talked to him a lot about this stuff, because I wasn't spending 6 hours a day reading scriptures, and he was. I'm putting in my 20 minutes. So he was really diving deep into all this stuff, really working hard for answers, and I was trying not to do that too much, because the Mormonism almost teaches against that, because they say don't focus too much on the negative. So I just tried to do the mainstream Mormon thing, but it just wasn't working. And when I found out that Tanner left and essentially was an atheist, something in me knew, if Tanner can't do it, then it's probably not true, and I can't do it either, because I was kind of still, while going through this faith crisis, you're hoping that you're going to get this answer, this relief eventually, and it's just going to make your faith stronger, and that obviously wasn't coming. So realizing that Tanner couldn't get that, and knowing that he hadn't done anything wrong, his heart was fully devoted to this thing, it was almost like a ticking time bomb at that point, and I knew it wasn't going to be possible deep down, but had just got married, so felt this weird sort of, it was a painful few weeks before I actually decided within myself to leave. And even though I hadn't been raised in the church, it still was incredibly traumatic, because this was my entire worldview, and for anyone to have their worldview shatter like that is traumatic.
Did it end your marriage?
It didn't end my marriage. My husband at the time had been, so I kind of think of it as Tanner was sort of here in his faith crisis. I was always one step behind him. And then my husband was always a couple steps behind me, because I was telling him stuff. He left the church too after about a week of me leaving, just after we were able to talk it out. I'm pretty persuasive and adamant. But it didn't end our marriage, but we got divorced 2.5 years later.
Oh, 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And then, so you dropped the bomb first.
Yeah, I was watching she recommended the documentary Scientology in the Prison of Belief.
Yeah, man, that's great to watch.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Going Clear.
Yeah.
Scientology in the Prison of Belief. And as I'm sitting there watching that, I'm seeing all the parallels between Joseph Smith and L. Ron Hubbard. There's both these treasure diggers, prolific writers too, quite creative in their own ways and brilliant in their own way, who are obviously looking for a way to get rich and realized religion was the best way to do it. And I don't want to make any final judgment on either of their character, but can say obviously did, propagated things that weren't true, and their organizations now also have a lot of parallels in the way that they treat outsiders, the way they treat people who leave particularly. And as I'm watching the stories of these people who have left Scientology and realizing that they were just as sincere as I was, and they loved it and felt it just as much as I did, and they eventually had to just realize through this slow whittling down of their faith that it wasn't true. And so as I'm sitting there, I think to myself, wow, if I was in a cult, would I want to know it? And it just kind of that awareness just settled on me. That's I am in a cult. Wow. So I got on my laptop the minute it ended, and emailed my bishop and said, I need to be released. I can't do this anymore. And then that next Sunday was my last. They had a lesson about, and the teacher stands up and says, we all know people who have left the church because they just want to sin. And I said, bullshit. And I just left, and that was it. And yeah.
We're going to be taking a 5-minute break at 9 p.m. We'll continue to stream live, so stay tuned for part 2. I just wanted to throw that in there. So you sent a letter to the bishop, an email. Mm-hmm. Did that get the ball rolling to get the name off, or did they hold a court or anything like that?
No, he wanted to meet with me, and he was a really nice, humble guy, and we chatted a bit. He wanted to know some of the things I was grappling with, though not in great detail, lest he, catch the dreaded illness. But it was obviously clear that I had done a lot more research than he had, so he kind of was like, well, okay, if you must leave. All right, bye. So he left, and I was, in a new singles ward, in a student ward in the summer, so there was like no one there. I hadn't really integrated super well into the ward, didn't know a lot of people, so I kind of just, it wasn't that big of a hubbub about me leaving, at least not on the local level. Once I came out on Facebook and said, I'm not a member of the church anymore, that was kind of where that was probably preliminary to what we're doing now, because there was a lot of people who we had known in school and in various positions on the mission and things who were all of a sudden, for the first time, hearing from someone they respected who left the church. And I tried to do it in the most loving, compassionate way possible, because in the beginning you're like, the church was so good to me and I don't wish them ill, but I have to leave. And then once you realize like how much they fucked you up, you're like, wait a minute, let's burn this motherfucker down. And then hopefully you get to a place where you're like, namaste, whatever. But
So how about mom and dad?
So after I left the church, I struggled with how I was going to bring that up to them, and it got to the point where I was so overwhelmed with anxiety about it that I could hardly perform at my job. I was having panic attacks at work, and finally one day I'm just like dry heaving in my car, and I said I have to tell them. So I call my mom, and I say, I asked her, would you love me no matter what? She goes, what, are you gay? I was like, that's a whole other conversation. And then I said, well, I'm leaving, I can't be a Mormon anymore, is what I said to her. And she said, oh, and I'm weeping and gasping for air. And she said, we love you because you're Tanner, not because you're a member of the church. And
great mom.
And yeah, I think so. And reiterated that, some of those values that I got growing up, again, weren't exclusive to Mormonism. It wasn't about being a Mormon. It was about just being a good person. And so I was grateful for that example. And to this day, even though it is hard to be like on different pages as your family, especially going from kind of being like the golden child to being the black sheep, has been tough, and it's not without its tension and a little bit of friction. But overall, I think we both have the attitude of mutual respect, and I'm not going to try to persuade you. You don't try to persuade me. Let's just meet in the middle.
Nice.
And yeah.
That's good you're able to do that. Is that with siblings too?
Yeah.
That's really
and my
good.
siblings are super cool too. I think the younger generations really are they have to get better and better at dealing with people who leave, because more and more people are leaving.
They really do. Samantha, how about your parents? Were they happy that you left, perhaps?
Oh yeah, they were quite chuffed.
Wow.
Now we can get a drink when you come home.
Yeah, honestly, my mum was like, does this mean you'll be drinking coffee now? And I was like, well, I still hate coffee, but...
So, and then I'm just curious, relationship with mom is closest, or dad too, is it?
Both. Like, I'm not close with either of them per se. I'm closer with my mum. Pretty good relationships with them both, but they're not, our lives aren't super intertwined.
Yeah. So it was just, okay, you've done it. Yeah, let's have a drink, perhaps.
Yeah.
All right, great. So you've both left now.
Mm-hmm.
And something on YouTube, you've done some YouTube videos, but it was Facebook where you started to get some kickback.
Get the conversation going is really where it started.
And then what happened from there between the two of you, and how did, take us up to the point where you decided on the name and what you were going to do, and what was your first production and release to the world?
We should probably back up a little bit.
Yeah, back up.
So we were kind of Mormon bloggers. We were Mormon bloggers prior to leaving the church. I had this site with a friend of mine called Millennial Mormons, which at the time blew up because there weren't a lot of people doing what we were doing. It was terrible content looking back, but we were kind of the only faithful Mormons that also had a sense of humor and would write satire. And I remember some faithful members of the church would sort of think we were irreverent for writing satire, but it was all super
so tame.
So tame, yeah. And our whole thing was like, your grandpa's gospel now with hashtags. So we were trying to make Mormonism cool. Failure. So me and Tanner kind of just sort of transferred all of the energy we put into that into Well, you wrote a poem first, didn't you?
Yeah, so I was processing that whole experience and was doing it in poetry and decided, maybe someone would like to hear this. So set up an iPhone and our friend recorded it and published it, and it got pretty big just kind of right off the bat.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact timing, but because we met John DeLynn.
Yeah, so we're in Logan where John used to live, and he was hosting a, what was it, like a support group for people transitioning out of faith, all ex-Mormons, I believe. And so we're like, let's go meet this John DeLynn guy, and that sounds perfect for us. So we went, and we told him that we had done Mormon blogging and things, and he was like, "Oh, that's so cool! We gotta have you on the show." And
oh yeah, I think some people on Reddit, when they found out that we left, were tagging John DeLynn saying you have to interview them, because ex-Mormon Reddit hated millennial Mormons because we were the worst.
And it was actually John who gave us our name. I knew I wanted to do something with Zelph. It was just like it's such a fun, short, memorable name. And such a good story that just totally undermines the Book of Mormon narrative. So I was like, I want to do something with Zelph. So we go to John. We go to John and we say, John, we want to do something with Zelph. What should we do? What rhymes with Zelph? And he goes, shelf. Zelph on the shelf. And so we're like, all right, that's it. I don't want to hear any more names. That's it.
Yeah. So he kind of gave us a boost. He shared our stuff from the beginning. So
Nice.
yeah,
Put
again,
us on the map.
yeah, he did, and it feels weird that I kind of got in early with Millennial Mormons and with this, but again, it was like no one was really talking about ex-Mormonism in a fun way. I mean, I'm sure people were, but not that we had really seen. So there was people like John DeLynn doing this incredible work, and I think we just kind of wanted to do more light-hearted stuff, because leaving the church can be so depressing, and so much of it is so serious and traumatic, and we are playful people, and kind of wanted to bring that to our content. So.
And we were, deeply hurt.
Yeah.
Really, you know how it goes. It's traumatizing, and went through a phase of just like, a sense of total nihilism and depression, and I think comedy, addressing these issues in a sort of lighthearted, fun way was cathartic for us, and I think it resonated with people too, because it is, you can only sit through so many 6-hour Mormon stories and just, oh my God, this is terrible, before you need a coffee and a laugh.
So did the comedy over time, I don't know your stuff that well, did it morph into some sardonic, sarcastic, maybe did it get more mean? Did it get more angry?
I don't know about
I think it's
mean.
got less mean.
Less
mean? I don't know that it's ever been mean.
Yeah,
but
we try not to be mean. It has been very sacrilegious. Yeah.
I think, definitely when we first left the church, we were more angry, and things like we would maybe be more inclined to sort of make these statements about Mormons that, when you think about the fact that actual Mormons we knew fell into the category, they were kind of offensive, or I don't know. I think we've just softened the way that we talk about it as we've realized more and more that everyone's just the product of their experiences and the things that have happened to them, and even the leaders of Mormonism are the products of their genetics and experiences, and it's, they're sort of victims of this thing too. They've been conditioned to be just that. So our anger's kind of completely gone over the years.
And it spikes up every once in a while. Living in Utah and having
yeah.
a state that's run by the church, and constantly having your values and opinions and ideas marginalized simply because you don't subscribe to this demonstrably false myth is sort of can irk the best of us at times.
Sure.
And with all that's coming out about sex abuse scandals and things in the church, and there's a sense of righteous indignation that pops up every once in a while. But I'd say overall that like personal embitterment has healed.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to have a Check My Church spot at our break. We're going to take a 5-minute break and come back with Samantha and Tanner. But I'm going to show my ignorance here. I really don't know how to characterize millennials relative to old fogies like me and other generations before, and even generations that's come up since. How do you categorize the millennial generation?
Here's the first
We
rule.
don't like categories.
We don't like to be categorized.
You're like existentialists.
Yeah.
You prefer to be defined.
Yeah.
I see. So is that the is that the thrust of a millennial? Don't box us in?
I'd say a good indicator is if they were born between, 1985 and 2000. And that's about as specific as you can get.
You're not going to give me any sort of zeitgeist or approach to life.
Well, we're quite postmodern and leftist leaning, but only because we're entering a wider global mentality and trying to.
And before we go to the break, I'm going to throw one hot button question out at you both in your opinion, because this is another millennial I recently met. We had him on the show. Tell me your thoughts on Kwaku L.
He's trying his best. He's living his truth, I guess. I don't know. We've heard a lot of stories of the way that he'll treat people and kind of the way he's talked to us online. And I
haven't ever
don't know what to
interacted
say.
with him really personally, just like a couple things here and there. So I guess I'll just decline to comment.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
I asked because he sort of represents the opposing force of your age and your outlook, and his approach is so pro restoration gospel, and it's just it's almost ironic.
Quite orthodox, which
Yeah.
is brave in
Orthodox.
2019.
Yes. So it was fascinating.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm not sure that he kind of is our opposite, in the sense that generally when we interact with Mormons on social media, like a lot of Mormons don't like Kwaku, don't like the way that he talks to people. He's quite authoritarian in his approach, which I think generally doesn't resonate with millennial Mormons, or at least the ones that are on Twitter that I'm seeing. So he's kind of a unique breed of, very orthodox.
I see.
Zealous.
Yeah, there's something about being a convert that makes you very zealous.
Sure. And regarding Kwaku and his orthodoxy and his zeal, and I guess he can be cantankerous with people, because I've heard that from others too. But what was I going to say? Do you? Is it important in your minds to have manners, to be polite and kind to people when you engage with them on things that you're going to absolutely differ with them about?
Yes, I think kind of no matter what we do, Mormons call us hateful because they have, they believe that criticism of their religion is inherently hateful. But we've gone back and forth with people like Kwaku, and I feel like we generally try to stay respectful. We attack beliefs, not people. We generally do not use ad hominem attacks. And we recognize that at the end of the day, everyone is the product of their experiences, and people can only be what life has made them. And so.
And he had reached out to us about doing a debate. And the more that we go on and experience our own personal healing and things, the more we see that, we had things that were so antagonistic or sacrilegious, blasphemous, you name it, as a way of expressing our grief and anger and things. But really, I'd say we've become more and more interested in extending the olive branch and trying to build a dialogue. Because if you just come in swinging at somebody, they're not going to be interested in what you have to say. So when Kwaku reached out about doing a debate, I said, what if we just sit down and just have a talk, and as people, not like as a Mormon, as an anti-Mormon, just like people who've had two experiences, and let's compare and contrast, and maybe be the means of kind of healing some of the tension between our two communities. Mm-hmm. And he was not interested in that. He wanted it to be a debate. And
fascinating.
Yeah, he recently made a video where he promised to donate $2,000 to an LGBT charity if we debated him, and I'm thinking, come on, man! If donate or don't hold don't hold charity hostage as a way of provoking someone into debating you. So if it was something like this where we could just sit down and just have a conversation, I think I've never met a person who I wasn't able to find something about them that I liked, And it's not to say that those people aren't out there, but I haven't, because if you just look at someone as just a person, it's not hard.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to focus more and more on that. Like, how do we just connect as people? Which is why art has come more into what we do as a way of just reaching more people in a way that's not so like, hey, everything that you've been taught about life is false, here's why. But something that can just touch them on an emotional level.
Art's a great unifier. One last thing on the millennial side. So, and I don't mean to belabor this topic, but it's interesting to me, and we're going to go to the break next. So stay tuned, 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back. But in your opinion, between your approach and the influence you have on the people who are millennials and younger, and Kwaku's approach to people who are in the church, and he's trying to, I'll say trying, or he is trying to be the standard for the younger generation to follow. It's not to say who's going to win, but who's going to win?
I don't think Orthodox religion is
going to make it.
Yeah.
I think we'll see more people like Kwaku becoming more and more prominent in the church. I think there's going to be quite a lapse of time where the church gets more conservative and doubles down. Meanwhile, I think the periphery of the church is going to become more and more progressive, and that these old hard lines are going to become less and less relevant to them.
I also think a big thing with millennials is we're very conscious of mental health, and I feel like a big part of our message is mental health, and as time's gone on, that's sort of what we're more passionate about almost than just Mormonism, and Mormonism is a tiny part of that we feel is harming people's mental health in all these ways. But I feel like the sort of orthodox, authoritarian approach, or whatever you want to call it, that Kwaku takes is not conducive to good mental health. And we're trying to teach these messages of tolerance and love and self-acceptance and recognizing that you're just what life has made you, and all this stuff, and that, like, there's a lot of friction between that message and, you need to be better, and love is almost conditional to a degree.
Apostates will be damned and thrust down to hell.
Yeah, and like, the way he otherizes ex-Mormons, anti-Mormons is so, I just don't think people are going to be into that long term.
And it's easy for us to sit here and act like we've been, perfect this whole time, and we surely
God,
have.
yeah, we've been angry.
Oh yeah, it's excellent. Really appreciate part 1. Come back and join us for part 2 in 5 minutes when we're going to watch one of their artistic expressions, which a good friend of ours plays a prominent role, and we'll see that in just a minute. Mic on? Okay, we're back. Welcome, you guys in the studio. We're starting up part 2. And, we ended sort of talking a little bit about art. And so I think it's a great time to show. Seth, are we ready for that? Yeah. This is why don't you introduce it? Tell us a little bit about it, and then we'll go to it. Okay.
Geez, it's hard to know what to say without just diving too far deep into anything.
Really?
It was a lyrical. I've done poetry, like I said. One of our first videos, if not our first video, was a kind of a slam poem, and this was an attempt at doing a lyrical poem, so adding some music, and drawing from some personal life experiences as well as my overall perspective on my relationship with the church. In some ways, my relationship with God, and so on.
And who did the music?
I have a buddy down in Provo who's a professional sound guy, so he whipped one up for me.
And did you shoot it?
Yeah. I have an old roommate who does videography, so he and I just tromped up into the mountains with our friend Larry here. And am I allowed to say his name?
Of course. He says,
"How did you on the internet?"
All right, well, let's take a look. And the name of it is High on a Mountaintop?
Yeah.
All right.
High on the mountaintop, I had a vision of horses and demons. Kitschy Mormon, heaven dreaming. I woke up in the morning, drenched in sweat and screaming, "Mother, forgive me, Mother, forgive me. I am a witness, I am a witness. Who is a witness? Who is a witness? Mother, forgive me." Whistleblower at my father's business. Thistle sower showed me forgiveness. Judas the priest on the lips to kiss me. Called to serve a run-on sentence with me. I am a witness, I am a witness. Father, forgive him, Father will kill him. Who is a witness? Who is a witness? None were with me, lips against me. High on the mountaintop, he washed me to the threshold of the temple. He brought me under the spreading chestnut tree who bought me. Nobody saw me, nobody stopped me. This is the place that made my stomach ache. Stakes raised in a Motel 8. It wasn't fake, it wasn't fake. He washed my feet, he kissed my face. A flag unfurled on a mountaintop, a rippling shock to my small town, like Shako when my walls came down. Make it stop, please make it stop. I wanna think somebody saw me. I need to know somebody's watching. I ache to hear somebody talking. I need to feel somebody wash me. I am a witness, I am a witness. Who is a witness? Who is a witness? Who'll be a witness? Who'll be a witness? I am a witness. Father, forgive me! I've seen her shake from her eyes to her toes. I've heard her scream cause she knows I know. I'm not the one, I'm not just one. I'm not my father's only son. Who is a witness? Who will be a witness? It isn't finished. I am a witness. I am a witness. I am a witness. Father, forgive me. Father, forgive me. Who is a witness? Who will be a witness? It isn't finished. I am a witness.
And fantastic performance.
Thank you.
Yeah, really great. Love everything about it. Wanted to go back one thing quickly with Samantha. Did you go through the temple the first time when you got married in Logan?
Yeah.
What was your response to that experience?
I'd been studying enough stuff by that point that I was sort of prepared for it to be as culty as it was. I think going through the faith crisis made me, I guess, less scared of knowing stuff that maybe regular members feel that they shouldn't know. I definitely didn't know everything that was going to happen, but yeah, I think the first time I did it, it was like a mixed bag in terms of how I was feeling. Like there was a part of me that thought this is this is culty. I didn't feel what you would hope to feel, and then another part of me felt this sort of sense of pride, or I'm not sure. Yeah, mixed.
And then how about Tanner, for you? Of course, you were much more steeped. You went on the mission. It was preparatory. You've been groomed for this. Did you find the thing inspiring? And
almost. Even for me, like, you know, I had prepared a ton, read Boyd K. Packer's book on the Holy Temple or whatever, and gone to all the preparation classes, and still, I went in trying to expect the worst, because everyone try to overplay the weirdness of it so that you get there and you're like, oh, it wasn't that weird. Yeah. They're like, you know, you're gonna wrestle a goat in there. And then you don't, and you're like, okay, it's not that much of a cult. All we did was stand naked in front of strangers. You know, no, I went in fully expecting just the worst thing I could imagine, like standing naked in front of everybody and having to say my worst sins or something like that, and it wasn't that bad. And I think by the time I went through the veil and saw all my family there, all that again, that like pressure and release was very much triggered. So I walked through and see them and felt a lot of love and happy to be there, and I developed an appreciation, you could say, for the temple, but then the more my faith crisis went on, the less and less I felt good there, because I'm like studying about the Masonic elements and some of the misogyny that was part of the experience, and reading old accounts of the temple and realizing how that's changed contrary to various doctrines and all the hang-ups with that. It got to a point where I remember sitting there just being like, I can't be in here, this is just too weird. And then I think after that, probably the next time I went was for her wedding.
Wow. So when you came to when the faith crisis was consummated and it was done, you take the garments off? Did you feel strange? Did you feel like I'm naked? Did you feel wrong, unprotected?
Not too bad. The interesting thing, what I'm grateful for is that because my research was so thorough, and it got to a point where it wasn't like, okay, I think I'm doing the right thing. It got to the point where I was like truly physically incapable of believing in Mormonism. You could give me $1 million and it wouldn't change my mind because I knew too much. And with that kind of awareness, it felt like the guilt or awkwardness of those types of things wasn't really as strong. Though I know that happens to people. I'm not, but yeah, I didn't feel too much like shame or weirdness about it. I was ready to move on. Yeah.
So, just out of curiosity, how do you subscribe the true believing Mormon? What is going on in their mind? Because we live in a day and age when you can find out anything if you really want to. Do you think that they're kind of saying, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, I just don't want to know? Do you think it's that? Or do you think that there are people who have studied all of it and they're still true believers? I mean, what's going on in the mind of people?
I think it's just the same for people in all kinds of high demand religions. Like we're emotional beings, first and foremost. We're a lot less logical than we like to think. And for people who have been, the majority of Mormons were raised in it and they have been taught this thing since birth. Their brains have been shaped by Mormonism since birth. They made this lifelong commitment when they were 8. Everything, kind of like with Tanner, his whole Mormon experience was like almost inextricably linked with his family. So every experience they have of like familial love and all these things throughout their life is attached to Mormonism. So, for them, they're ascribing, everything that's so good and beautiful about life, to them, it has a tie to Mormonism because that's how it's been their whole life. And those roots run really deep in the brain. They don't, neurons that fire together, wire together or whatever, that conditioning runs so deep, and that's why it is such a big deprogramming process for so many people leaving cults, high demand religions like Mormonism. So I think it's not, I think there are a lot of Mormons that know there's information out there that might trouble them, and there's definitely an element of not looking at it. And then I do think there are people who do kind of know possibly everything, but I think you can know everything about the history of Mormonism, but if you don't understand your own psychology, and if you don't understand kind of the neuroscience behind religious conviction, you can keep believing in anything if there's enough of an emotional incentive to do so.
Got it. So then, how would you, having said all that, Samantha, what would you say? How is Tanner? How are you? How am I different?
How are we different?
How did we get out?
I guess it's like the right combination of factors, you know? We'd had, I don't know, I mean, for me, the obvious answer is I didn't grow up with it, so didn't have that deep conditioning, so when I encountered that information, there was less to work through.
Right.
For Tanner, he cared so deeply about Mormonism for various reasons. It had been a thing that he'd clung to throughout his life, so he cared enough to really investigate this stuff. I assume it was the same for you. I haven't listened to your interview.
From my observation, and I know that I have a limited perspective, and I'm not trying to generalize all Mormons, but from what I've been able to tell in my experience, there's sort of a bell curve to interest in the church, and that Mormonism works best for people who are kind of, just lukewarm, and the ones who are, really firebrand in one direction are likely to get out. The ones who really care the most and who are out to be the missionaries or whatever, those tend to leave because eventually they'll find out.
That's a really good insight. Really good insights from both your parts. So this isn't word association, but I want to throw some words at you and talk about these things.
Cool.
All right. So, and there's no rhyme or reason to them, but I'm just going to throw words out, and I just want you to tell me, and I'm going to pause. I'll say the word. I'll let you each think because you're two individuals, and then we'll hear your initial response. And so just give it to us what it is. The first one. Are you ready? No rhyme or reason. Cultural hall.
Sad weddings.
Sad weddings. That's fascinating.
Pubescent embarrassment.
There's even all these years having been out and studied religion and done what I do, I still like the fact that they have them. I just think it's just ingenious. They all smell the same. They're just this place where, like you said, prepubescence. You have the wedding there. Talk about the feelings attached to the church.
Yeah.
Cultural hall.
The place where I played basketball. Now I'm meeting my eternal companion.
Yeah, exactly. It's just fascinating.
There's a Hare Krishna temple. That's here in Salt Lake. That's a converted LDS chapel, and every Wednesday night they host dances. So they've got, it's like your traditional cultural hall, but they've got murals of Vishnu and Krishna and big statues of Krishna and all these hippies dancing in there. And it's kind of yes, all roads have led back to.
How funny! That's really
kind of
classic.
funny to experience the cultural hall in a different context.
So the next one that is on my list, but this is in order. So church dances. Did you go to them?
Unfortunately.
I think I went to one.
You went to one. They have them in England.
Yeah, I think I went to one church dance, possibly two, but the first time I went, I was not baptized. And I was wearing a shirt that had, it was like a shoulder cutout, so there was like a slit here. And the young women's stake presidency told me I needed to change. And I was with a Mormon friend, and she had a t-shirt she gave me. But looking back on that, I'm surprised how well I took it. To me, I must have had some kind of, something that made me okay with authority like that, because
the Samantha I know now would never.
I'd be outraged, but at the time I was like, okay, following the rules.
Yeah, it makes you feel kind of good.
Yeah, I don't know.
Your blouse was probably beautiful and everything. They have you put a t-shirt on, and that's more acceptable.
Yeah.
Amazing. And your experience of the dance is not so good?
Oh, I mean, it was fine, just awkward. I like to dance a lot and was probably more, I don't know, gregarious and flamboyant in my dancing than anybody else. And so I tried to make the best time of it I could, but they got really old pretty fast. Same soundtrack every single time. And
funny.
Yeah.
I loved them.
Yeah.
In my generation, they were just great hunting grounds for naive girls. I'm sorry.
Hunting grounds is an interesting term.
That's exactly what it was. I'm sorry. That's exactly what it was. As rude as that might be to people who are more reasonable today. Book of Mormon. How would you explain the Book of Mormon? I mean, you don't have to go through all the details. Well, you know, he wrote it this and all. But just Book of Mormon. What do you think? Summary statement. The Book of Mormon.
Bible fan fiction is what people say a lot, which seems accurate.
I think like any narrative is sort of an archetypal representation of the cosmos of Joseph Smith's mind. You see a lot of personal elements in it, a lot of the Bible in it, obviously. Yeah.
So
I think it was written to address the issues that Christianity was facing in his day, according to his perspective.
Yeah. Do you think he composed it then? Do you have an opinion on that, or do you think he had help, or do you think it was a team?
I think he, mostly composed it, or entirely.
I think he and Oliver probably double-timed it in some way.
Got it.
Like, I could see him being the primary inspiration behind it, and then Oliver helping refine it and make it more palatable, perhaps.
Okay. So now getting more into the mindset of you young kids, purpose of life.
That's a big question.
It is.
I think I think there's a million subcategories within this, but I think kind of the best thing you can do in life is to understand the interconnectedness of all things in terms of yourself, others, the natural world.
It's people often will say like, oh, if you're an atheist, then how do you find a purpose in life? And the answer is, well, you choose one. And people are like, well, if you choose one, then it's not a purpose. And it's like, well, you're choosing one by belief, you know? We all choose, or at least are drawn to the things that give us a reason to wake up in the morning. And but yet at the same time, you wouldn't ask like an animal in the wilderness what its purpose is. Its purpose is just to be. And we as animals, I think there is no inherent purpose other than to be. And the more that we get comfortable just being what we are, observing ourselves in our natural state, the more we're equipped to act out in ways that reveal our interconnectedness with things, which allow us to act in ways that relieve suffering, which is, I would say, our primary purpose as people and as a media group is to try to relieve suffering.
Yeah, and also promote vitality, I guess.
Yeah.
So are you atheists, agnostics? Have you come to that after the faith crisis from Mormonism?
Yeah, I'd call myself an atheist.
I'd call myself an atheist, but I'd also, in classic millennial hate to be categorized way, would also flip the coin completely and call myself a pantheist.
Yeah.
So I'd be comfortable with either of those labels.
Okay. Which, from a Christian perspective, they are one and the same.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, that's fine. So with your atheism, and I'm sure I'm just discussing with you, you realize the difference between saying you're not sure, don't know, believe there's a God, or you haven't been convinced, versus there is no God.
Right.
Because one is sort of assuming an omniscience.
So I feel like that's a misconception almost about atheism, because atheism is just saying you don't have a belief in a God. You haven't witnessed sufficient evidence to believe that. And then I guess if you see agnostic as, you know, you kind of don't take a stance either way, they're not that different, but...
Yeah, people tend to view it as like agnosticism is the middle of the spectrum between belief and disbelief, but that's not like quite how the word is. That's actually like an intersection like this, where you have agnosticism, which is saying I don't know versus I don't believe. So I'm an agnostic atheist.
Yeah.
I don't know, and I also don't believe.
So what kind of atheist are you?
What does that mean?
In the quadrant of the, are you a there is no God, or I don't know if there is, I don't have a God that plays a role in my life?
I think there's not sufficient evidence for me to believe that there's a God, and I'm also aware that humans evolved to believe in shared myths, which was religion, because it fostered cooperation between tribes. So religion has been really integral to our evolution as a species, and that's not nothing. And I think that's where like the pantheism comes in for us, recognizing that you know, most religions are tapping into these sort of truths or these parts of the brain that we evolved to have. You know, we evolved to have spiritual experiences. They are like, we're still very big on spirituality in a secular context. Yeah, I guess I don't believe that there's a God in the same way that I don't believe in anything that I haven't received evidence that there is.
It's also hard to talk specifically about God because there's so many different conceptions of God.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I can say I don't believe in that conception of God or that conception. But you know, you take like a Taoist or a Hindu perspective of God, where God is just everything that is, this like swirling, infinite interactive matrix of some kind of which we find ourselves. And so I like to say I don't believe in a higher power, but I do believe in a wider power. That is to say, I see myself as an intersection of everything that it is, and by understanding how I fit into that integrated system, I'm able to draw power and intelligence from the whole thing, so I can look out at the stars and recognize its attachment to my sense of identity, and other people as my sense of identity. And the more I can do that, the more I can act out of love and compassion.
I see. So, just out of curiosity, it sounds like, listening especially to you, Tanner, you've given me some hints more than Samantha has, at least to this, is that you tend to look at Eastern metaphysics as more viable than the Christian idea of a personal God.
Metaphysics is maybe even a stretch, because while I think you'd be a fool to say everything that can be seen and felt right now with our tools is all that there is. I mean, people have been making that mistake forever.
Sure.
And that's part of the problem of religious history, is being dogmatic about what we think we know when there's so much more going on. So I think I try to not buy any metaphysical explanation when there's a perfectly physical explanation for things. So even as far as Eastern religion, it's not about the metaphysics as much as it is recognizing like the value of symbols. So with Christ, for instance, Christ is the Western, at least, archetype of love embodied, of someone who's recognized that they are all that they are, existing as an intersectional human being. And that's a little bit reductive and probably not as well as I'd like to explain it, but that awareness, and you know, someone we can look to as someone who was, you know, perfectly upright and honest and loving is, I'd say, the primary element there. But you know, other cultures have their mythic hero, whether that's Krishna or Vishnu or whoever you want to say, and that archetype is just as important in their individual and collective psyche as Christ is to ours.
Sure.
And it's not important the name that you call it, whether you say Jesus or Yeshua or Krishna. What you're talking about is love embodied, and how do I better become love embodied.
I see.
So yeah, it's not so much about the metaphysics as it is trying to, and maybe this comes into millennials, that we're more, you know, we're raised on the internet. And the internet, I like to think of as the sort of neural network of the planet. It connects us. And so I can look at those mystic traditions and say, I have something in common. That spiritual experience they've had, that Shakti or that reborn experience, that Samadhi, whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing. Because when I read about it and the effects that it's had on your life, I can say, I've experienced that too. And so rather than arguing who has the best language to describe it, we can ease a lot of tension by saying, yes, 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 all this and more.
Samantha, you had something to say? Oh, maybe you didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
I definitely think a lot of my spirituality now is quite Buddhist in nature, and I don't mean the religion of Buddhism. I know Buddhism takes a lot of different forms now, but from what I've studied of the Buddha's original teachings, you know, about non-attachment and kind of breaking free of these stories that we tell ourselves, because most of us go through life so attached to our own conditioning, so attached to these narratives that society has told us. And I think Jesus was a really enlightened thinker who understood that too. And I think what Jesus taught was very similar to what the Buddha taught, but in, you know, the language of his day and in his own context. I tend to think Jesus was perhaps not as theistic as people think, but regardless, I think he was an enlightened thinker who understood the value of ego death, you know, killing our attachment to these stories and these ideas we have about good and bad. And I think the reason he preached forgiveness so intensely was he understood that we're all just the products of our genetics and experiences. You know, apparently when he hung on the cross, he said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." He really understood that people are just playing out these stories that they have inside their heads. And I think Buddhism for me, or Buddhist principles, I guess, has been really valuable in helping me recognize my own conditioning, recognize the stories I'm telling myself, and kind of disidentify with them. So I'm not, I don't know if ego death is like a term people understand, but I personally believe that Jesus understood the value of that and kind of tried to teach that in the language of his day.
It certainly should be something Christians understand. If they don't, they're missing a big piece of the whole point.
And yeah, like you said, both of them have to do with kind of a radical sense of acceptance. Buddha's with just the systems of the world we find ourselves in, Christ with like on a moral level, saying like, I recognize that my capacity for darkness is just as deep as anybody else, and that had my genetic code found itself in the circumstances in which you were found in, I could be doing just the same thing you were doing. If I was born as Hitler, I'd be Hitler.
Got it.
And sorry for bringing Hitler into this, because that's just...
You almost have to.
You have to. But you know, but once you realize that then you can offer that grace or that compassion, however you want to put it. And Jesus and Buddha both offer that.
I've heard, Samantha especially, you've mentioned something several times. You've mentioned it a couple times, Tanner. Samantha, you have said we are a product of our genetics and our experience. My worldview is that is true to a certain extent, but I am a great believer in us also being products of our choices. And I do believe in choice and free will. Your thoughts on free will?
I don't believe free will exists in the way that people think it does. I think it's helpful to live as if free will exists, because I obviously want to be improving, I want to be making moral choices and all those things, and I want to encourage other people to do that. So it's not necessarily I think there's ways it's really helpful to understand that free will doesn't exist. Like, it can give you that kind of radical love and acceptance for others that you know, Jesus, Buddha, whoever talked about. But I think every choice we make, our brains are evaluating all the information it's ever received through our, you know, whatever neurology setup we've got going on in there, and then sort of making a choice based on what we've been conditioned to value. And so I think even when we make choices, to a degree they are almost predetermined, because it's our brain is just scanning whatever information it has available to it. And even if it feels like you're choosing between one or the other, ultimately, like, your brain's values are already there. It's a tough thing to talk about, is free will. But yeah, I don't personally believe free will
so they've
exists like that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
They've done studies where they've shown when a brain is exposed to some stimulus, the part of the brain that is responding physically to it acts before the narrative part of our brain. That is to say, we tend to think of our minds as dictating a story, when in fact it's just narrating what's happening. And our body is already acting, and then our body is telling us why it's doing what it's doing, which is sort of a flip of how we traditionally see it. And that being said, though traditional classic free will may not exist, we do have a very real perception of free will. And in that sense, I look at free will as sort of existing on a spectrum, and that the more you're able to become aware and gain intelligence or information, the more you're able to expand and play with your tool set. It's almost like we're an algorithm that learned it's an algorithm, and once you learn that and realize, oh, I'm just a code written by somebody else, well, then I can go in and start adding to that code and giving myself the tools to then grow. So it's sort of, and maybe this is sort of theological, alchemical perspective, but in my sense, that's when I become a co-creator with creation, because I am a product, I am a creation, but once I know that, I can start co-creating with it.
I have absolutely no resistance to that. I think that's fantastic.
Well, it's very Buddhist of you.
I actually thought it was very Christian of me.
Well, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, it's not about the language, right?
Right, yeah.
It's very human of us.
And I see that very much in the Christian narrative, but a lot of Christians don't, unfortunately. And by the way, I have some friends who are, they would call themselves hardcore atheists. There is no God, you idiot. They've sat right here with us, and I like these guys, but there is no free will. There is no free will.
Yep.
Everything is it's determinism from the beginning. I have trouble with it simply because I like your algorithm idea, because you, having the genetics and pretty much the experience as your other siblings and your whole thing, you brought in information that helped mitigate those factors.
Yeah.
And it helped you make some decisions that they haven't yet made. And so I tend to think that when people are open to bringing in information to the algorithm, they can change. And I think it is a joint effort between what I believe is God and us. I think it's a two-way street, and we are engaged in that together. As lazy as you want to be is as lazy as he'll be, and as active you want to be is as interactive as he'll be. But that's just a side issue. Go ahead.
I was going to say it is quite paradoxical.
Yeah.
My view, and I'm comfortable with paradox. I think as a Mormon, I was taught that everything had to be black and white, and as much as I can, I've recognized how if you can be so incredibly wrong about every facet of life, well then I'm not going to be so quick to draw hard, fast lines saying it's all this way or all nothing, you know.
Right.
So I don't believe in free will, and yet at the same time I believe that a belief in free will is helpful and important, and will, you know, because if we just say, you're just the product and you don't have any choice and you just are what you are, well, that doesn't inspire anyone to change and to make a difference. And so it's sort of a helpful myth that I think is important, the kind Sam talks about, that is good at unifying people and inspiring people, and frankly, we need that.
But let me ask you, just to follow up with that, Tanner, what's the value of it if it inspires someone to change, but they can't?
I think a big part of, sorry,
go
you
ahead.
direct that to Tanner, but I think a big part of our ability to change is believing that we can. And, you know, whether or not we believe we can will also be determined by whatever's happened to us in our lives. And maybe to a degree, you know, our neuroplasticity, so maybe our age, but I think people are much more capable of change when they believe they can change. Because for me to even, you know, for me to change, I have to first get the idea that I'm capable of change and discover, you know, have some kind of value system that makes me want to implement a certain change and perceive a positive result from doing that. Like, even though I, you know, kind of am a determinist and all those factors are dependent on all these things, yeah, I think free will can be a valuable concept, if not like a true one.
I see. Our audience, there's a percentage of our audience, 56% to tell you the truth, they sit in the wings and they watch this stuff, and they are highly critical of me for not pouncing on people with all the evangelical rhetoric that we pounce on people with. They want to see it happen, and right now
they want a bloodbath.
They're slitting their wrists because they haven't seen one here.
Pounce.
Yeah, no, I don't believe in that, because I think the exchange of ideas, we learn far, and I think what people at home are able to see firsthand from your own mouths, what you represent, what you believe, what you're about. You're articulate, you're explaining yourselves, and, you know, if that's not good enough, too bad, you know.
Yeah.
What is
bad.
pouncing? Yeah, too bad. The next word is sin. Any thought on that word? Is there such a thing in your world?
You talk, 'cause I'm trying to remember something.
I mean, there are things a person ought not do. Kill, steal, that sort of thing. And I realize that that's sort of a construct that we have arrived to, that we say we do better as a species when we're not killing and stealing from each other. That being said, I don't see it in the same way that, we're all fallen, or, we're all choosing to be evil, because again, it's sort of like we've said so many times, we are just the product.
Yeah.
We're products, we're creations. And it's not your fault for being what you are, and acknowledging that allows a sense of forgiveness of self that then extends to other people and other things. But yeah, as like sin as a concept, I don't really buy.
Just to follow up before we go to Samantha. So if Dahmer was alive and he came and he consumed your younger brother, assuming you have one, you would feel that is just a product of genetic makeup and experience, and he had no choice. And
yeah, I mean, a psychopathic brain doesn't even have the hardware to feel empathy.
Yeah.
So it's like, to what extent can I judge someone who is literally incapable of feeling love?
So do you think in all practicality you are able to forgive and forget the extreme of Dahmer? Let's just say I got mad at you right now and punched you in the face. Would you walk out of here and say, I love that guy,
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, we're talking concepts versus like my personal ability to cope. I think oftentimes we stress forgiveness in situations where I don't know if it's always necessary. Like, I try to be a person who forgives, but not because I think it's the best ideal for, like, I don't know, this big overarching concept. It's for me, it's, taking the bitterness out of my own heart, because me being upset at you for something isn't going to hurt you. It's just going to keep hurting me.
Sure.
So the sooner I can let go of that, the better. But yeah, that doesn't reach into some like deep existential, eternal like quality of your soul.
Got it.
I think there's a difference between cognitively forgiving someone and emotionally forgiving someone, and I feel like at this point in most situations it's very easy for me to I guess cognitively forgive people, but we're all human, we all have to go through grieving processes when we're hurt, but like Tana said, forgiveness is ultimately for ourselves. Yeah.
So, in Mormonism, people, that's the thing. You have to forgive your abuser, for instance, which to an abused person is just saying, I don't care about your experience. You just have to suck it up and take it. And when I think that's like using forgiveness as a bully stick of some kind. That being said, I think it's a great personal goal to have.
All right. Someone give Reed a Claritin. Is sex. What's the mindset of this millennial group on down? I know the mindset of my generation. We want as much of it as possible. But what is the mindset? Is there value in virginity? Is there value in abstaining from sexual relationships that are aberrant and promiscuous? Or does it matter?
I don't think we like virginity as a concept, just because of the way it's been used historically. I guess our generation is big into consent, so we're fine with people abstaining if that's what they want to do, and we're also fine with people doing whatever they want. Feels weird speaking on behalf of my generation.
Yeah. No millennial wants to speak for millennials.
Is that verboten?
Yeah, I'd say consent is definitely the word for millennials when it comes to sex, and that is what distinguishes, whether behavior is acceptable or not.
Let me just play off that for a second, because you said we understand that for stealing and murder, we've just kind of generally understood that that's not beneficial to society. And I raised 3 girls, and so I read a number of books, Reviving Ophelia and Return to Modesty by Sheldon, and different books. And the studies show that, forget religion, promiscuity in women especially is quite damaging. I mean, the studies show that. So why is consent the you guys seem pretty enlightened. Why would you just say consent is the thing we look to? I mean, when I was 13, I was consenting with anybody, and I'm not sure it did any good for my soul. So explain that a little.
So with regards to promiscuity, I don't necessarily think that it's, you know, having sex with a lot of people makes you feel bad. I think you've got to look at what's driving the promiscuity to begin with. And I think a lot of women, because of what society has taught them, and yeah, just the way that we're sort of raised to feel about ourselves and our bodies and sex and all this stuff, you know, women can be inclined to be promiscuous as a way to sort of try and fill this hole in their hearts, which can't be filled through sex, you know, like I'm very pro-sex, but you know, it's not a coping mechanism. And so I think I imagine the reason the studies would show that is because the type of people that would engage in promiscuous sex are, you know, using it as a coping mechanism, trying to fulfill something inside them, and it's not necessarily a healthy approach. So it's not, I don't have any issues with people having a lot of sex, but it's about the why behind where they're doing it. If they're doing it to, you know, just generally have a fulfilling physical experience, to connect with people, and it's all very healthy and they don't need it to be okay, then fair enough. And obviously if it's coming from that place of lack, of not feeling whole, then yeah, it's not going to be helpful.
So just to summarize, you do believe it's possible for a young girl or an older woman, whatever, to arrive at a place where she can be what we call promiscuous and engage that way with many partners, and it to be completely normative and healthy and never damaging, so long as she's not approaching it as a means to gain intimacy or some other reason.
Yeah, for sure. I know plenty of women like that.
How old are they?
I guess around my age. But I'd also question why you asked that question solely with women in mind. Like,
well, men
because
too.
of the specific
Men
studies.
too. But I read the
Okay.
studies on women.
okay,
So
that's interesting though, that the studies are on women and that you bring it up through the lens of women. And
Yeah.
because, you know, female promiscuity is always the thing that's being asked about. It's never male promiscuity.
And
well, typically male promiscuity, it does affect the soul of the male, but I think the studies show that the female promiscuity affects women more.
Yeah, and I think that's because women have been taught by society and various ideas to that, you know, their bodies are these objects to a degree, and you know, we've been taught to almost see our value through that lens. And so of course it makes women feel shitty if they're like looking for something in sex and then they're only ending up kind of feeling devalued because they're not getting the intimacy they want through it. Whereas men haven't been raised to have such a toxic relationship with their bodies, with sex, to have it so tightly associated with, you know, their self-worth.
So you think it's all conditioning?
Yeah.
a lot, yeah, I'd say it speaks more to our cultural views on women and sex than it does the actual act of sex.
Got it.
I mean, there's so many false narratives about sexuality, particularly women's sexuality. You know, they don't enjoy it as much. They're not as promiscuous. That's a big one. When in fact, like, women tend to want more diversity or novel sexual relationships than even men often, and they are very capable of enjoying sex. And so, you know, when you have these shame-based narratives that's coming from a culture that has treated women as commodities for male sexual activity, and where they're held to a high, you know, Victorian standard of fidelity, while men aren't held to the exact same standard, of course it puts so much psychological pressure on a woman. And yet, I don't think it's like basic and human intrinsic nature to be a monogamous or marital even. We can see plenty of Aboriginal, indigenous, hunter-gatherer cultures where polyamory is a part of the cohesiveness of the community, and that it does strengthen social ties, and it is a good way of you know, allowing for group intimacy and for the reduction of tension among the group. So to take a hard stance that, oh, promiscuity is inherently bad, and even framing it as promiscuity versus polyamory or something like that is already setting up a bias for this is negative, why shouldn't it be? When in fact, it's this whole monogamic marital system, even though it may work, I'm not trying to like throw it under the bus here, it is a relatively new iteration of human relationships and doesn't deserve the high pedestal that we've put it on. I mean, I just lived at in a group in Hawaii, and they were polyamorous. A woman there had a boyfriend, and in Sweden to that day, and she died at age like 96 the week after I left. And you know, it worked for her their whole life, and she was there with her primary partner, and he was there with her, and you know, it works, and doesn't have to work for everybody. But yeah, maybe I'm just rambling now.
So revelatory. I am so grateful for your transparency and saying this, because I know that there is a large number of my generation and older whose mouths are agape right now. Just, what the shit is going to happen to this world in the hands of this generation? That's exactly, it's
But yeah, this is why ideas like consent matter, because we can say, okay, we don't have to be so dogmatic, we don't have to be so shameful about sex, and granted, like with any behavior, there are risks associated with that behavior. So it's not just, you know, free love, everything goes. You have to understand the risks, and you have to be careful about what you're doing, and you have to be open and honest with the people that you have relationships with, and
You're describing pretty much a utopian society here,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it's not. It is ideal, but like that's any system you want to have the. It's possible, is all I'm saying.
Got it.
And I'm not saying it's for everybody, but it's possible, and I think our generation is showing that.
Yeah.
Do you think that was? I'm glad. Oh, that was good. Do you think? I'm sorry, we're almost out of time. Evil, is there such a thing?
I fundamentally no. I mean, like, evil is a useful term. You know, to me, someone abusing a child is evil. But it's just a word. You know, like I said.
Very subjective usage.
Yeah, I believe we're all the products of our genetics and experiences, as I keep harping on about. So, you know, I guess I would use the term evil when describing situations where someone is the victim of a lot of suffering at the hand of another person. But a lot of evil acts are carried out by people who are psychopaths, literally do not have the ability to feel empathy. So, like, can you blame them for that? And then also people that have been very traumatized as children, who have never, you know, haven't developed healthily, mentally, all these things. So,
and a lot of bad things done by people who have the best intentions, or who claim to have superior systems of morality or what have you.
So you both have an explanation for evil, which is different than what the standard fare is for evil, which is it's black, it's dark, it's bad, it's wrong. You would say, no, I think if we look at all the reasons behind the black, dark, wrong, we wouldn't say it's evil. We say it's a product of experience.
Yeah, we could say evil because it's just a relative term is all.
Yeah, and I also think the value in understanding that evil potentially doesn't exist in the way people think. Like, it's like people kind of subscribe to this myth that there's this core part of our brain that, like, we're choosing whether to be good or evil, or I don't know, however people see it. The value in understanding that evil arises because of, you know, a set of conditions and all these interconnected factors is then we're able to, you know, kind of dismantle systems that allow evil to be perpetuated. And instead of just, you know, looking at someone who's done a terrible thing and saying, like, oh, he's just evil, it allows us to, you know, go back to consider what led to that person doing that thing, and then we can be much more effective at reducing evil than if we just say, oh, well, some people are just evil, or, you know, there's always been good and evil, and these kind of like abstract narratives that aren't rooted in neuroscience and reality. It's so much more beneficial to recognize the limits of free will.
Yeah, who wakes up and says, like, I'm gonna be evil today? Of course, like,
and if they are, what's led them to think like that, to value evil things?
Yeah.
Look at our criminal justice system. It's all based on the idea that people choose to do bad things.
Right.
And then what happens? Okay, well, you need to be punished for the bad things you've done, and our recidivism rates are through the roof.
Sure. And
we're just cycling people in and out of the prison, for-profit prison system, mind you, and not actually fixing the problem. Whereas in other countries and other cultures, where they're more about you know, helping people through it, giving them the tools that they need to change the things, is so much better, rather than just treating people as, well, you chose this, therefore.
So let me throw you just a couple things out that come to mind. So you wouldn't, in the classic sense, say that Marxism's evil. You wouldn't say that the materialism of the Mormon Church and the $3.2 billion mall is an expression of evil. You'd say there's just a bunch of men who think that nice malls are good and they can prey upon people with tithes.
I could call it evil.
Yeah,
I don't
we're
know.
not against the word evil.
Yeah.
It's still like a useful word
Do you
sometimes.
do you ever see anything? Do you see the pogroms in Russia? Do you see anything to bring up Hitler again? Do you see any mass movement as being the product of evil?
What is evil? You know, I think
It's the
any
opposite of
mass.
life.
It's
You guys are about eliminating suffering, so evil seems to me like it would
The
cause
intentional
suffering.
perpetuation of suffering.
Yeah,
of course, there's
molesting.
intentional
Beating up
perpetuation.
homosexuals. Is
Yeah.
it evil?
yeah, you can use the word evil, but you also recognize that these systems of suffering don't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, I would agree with that. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, there are people who are perpetuating systems and actions that cause suffering.
And if I wouldn't use the word evil, it's not because I am like diminishing the impact of like the harm, you know. It's not to like belittle anyone's
Right.
suffering. It's not like that, you know.
Yeah.
Or to even pretend like true maliciousness doesn't exist, because
Yeah.
it does.
But it doesn't exist in a vacuum.
No. So, and I'm saying no, I understand what you mean. Yeah, okay.
Cool.
Finally, we're out of time. It's 10 o'clock. We've gone 2 hours, 2 quick hours.
Yeah.
You take your last breath. It's over? Done? Nothing beyond? This was it?
Well, energy can't be created or destroyed.
Ooh.
So something's happening, but I don't believe in the continuation of a soul per
So
se.
you like that thermodynamic rule.
Yeah, big into the second law of thermodynamics.
So
Yeah.
you believe that applies to, then what you're saying is there's something inside you that is generating the energy to move this corporal body around that is going to continue on because it can't be created or destroyed?
I mean, energy from my body will go into the earth wherever it goes.
Will you, Samantha, exist?
I doubt it.
You doubt it?
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I don't think so. Which is why part of my like spiritual paradigm is learning to identify with the whole of creation. You know, if God is in all things and through all things, including myself, then all of it is God, and all of it will continue to be all of it even after I've gone, and the part that I've played in it and the things that I've contributed will go on. In that sense, my spirit will live on, but I don't know if that there's like a tangible Tanner personality that will continue onward.
Got it. Yeah, that was my question. Is there a tangible Tanner and Samantha?
And I don't mean to say like I know that there's not. I don't know.
You just,
but
well, no one knows.
Yeah. But it doesn't. From what I understand now, it doesn't seem the case to me.
A big thing that resonates with me is just the Buddhist concept of everything being temporary. And we see that with the second law of thermodynamics, for example. Like the earth is ultimately one organism, and we like to think of ourselves as separate beings, but none of us are separate beings because we are constantly, like there's this constant interplay between, you know, we're molded by other people, we're shaped by the food we eat, like everything is interconnected, is my
To say
ultimate...
nothing of the genetic code that, you know, has all kind of come down the family tree.
Exactly. Like, yeah, even trauma can be passed down through genetics, through generations. But anyway, the earth is ultimately just this one organism, or I guess the universe is ultimately, you know, this one thing. And we as humans, for survival, kind of need to view everything as separate. We need to compartmentalize because it helps us navigate our experience as Homo sapiens. But ultimately, everything is one.
Last word association, Jesus. Thoughts?
Dope.
Dope. And by the way, that means good.
That means good.
Tanner?
Is this a one word, or can I just
Whatever you
spitball?
want.
A lot of my like coming to peace with my life has been, you know, when I left the Mormon church, I felt like I had to just reject everything outright. And that was good because it allowed me to step away and then return back and see which parts I wanted to integrate back into my life. And I saw that there was a lot about Christianity that, regardless of how I feel about metaphysics or, you know, the non-existence of a great white man in the sky, you know, or whatever model for God we want to use, I could still recognize that there was some beauty in the simplicity of his teachings and in the power to affect human civilization in a really lasting, dramatic way. And so I've done a video on this about my my appreciation for Jesus as an atheist, as a humanist, because a lot of what we term to be moral in today's society comes from that. Granted, I think Christianity as a whole has been weaponized against a lot of people and done a lot of harm, and to this day remains a largely bastardized endeavor.
Don't disagree.
Yeah. That being said, I do have appreciation for the man, whoever he was.
So not a myth. Not a myth.
I don't think so. I think there's enough out there to say, yeah, he was a real person who, you know, was killed by the Romans or whatever, and the extent of his like political activism, or, you know, the Gospels are second and third hands account, so like how much can we trust everything to be exactly the way he said it? But I feel like from my own experiences, my spiritual experiences have resonated so deeply, and I can look and say, yeah, whatever he learned, whatever he experienced 2,000 years ago, I in my own way have felt a similar thing. And so I can appreciate that shared human experience.
Wow. Any final words for the audience?
We love you. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, we have a call? What line?
Oh.
A call, wow.
On an actual telephone.
Well, let's, you're on the air.
Hey, what's going on? This is Conk. I'm actually in the online chat watching.
Hey, Tom.
Cool. Hey, so, is this just for you, or is the Zelph duo there also?
No, the Zelph people are here.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going? Good to see you guys. Well, I mean on the screen. I can't see you in the phone. I have a question. There was going to be a Shawn, but it's funny because I think Sam and Tanner also brought it up, which I thought was kind of interesting. But I wanted to talk about Christianity, specifically the New Testament, because I fully believe in the ChristiAnarchy, you know, faith is subjective and all of that. And I actually just finished Knife to a Gunfight, and it was awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so, based on that, I've been studying a lot of evolutionary psychology and the differences between the sexes. So it's kind of funny when we were talking about like sex and sin and promiscuity, you guys kind of brought that up anyway. And then the chat was kind of talking about it briefly. My original question was for Shawn, when we have the subjective faith now and all things are lawful but not all things are beneficial, you know, we have subjective, and it's more of a fluid morality, I would say. How does that apply to like promiscuity and premarital sex and all of those things? And then on top of that, how do we talk about, if we do believe in no premarital sex, which I'm not sold on, how do we explain like multiple wives and multiple concubines in the Old Testament?
Well, from me, I don't subscribe to any stance that I think I'm going to tell another person. Everybody is it's up to themselves, their God, their choice, what I believe is their choice, their freedom, whatever they think they want to do, they're going to do it. And my responsibility as a Christian is to love them, irrespective of anything that they say, do, think, or believe. So it's up to them. But I've always maintained that. In terms of the Old Testament, you know, you can go back to Lamech, who was the first polygamist. He's the one who introduced it, Cain's son. And Sarah, Abraham's wife, introduced Hagar. This was all the product of men and women coming up with ideas. Never do we see it authorized or ordained by God in the Old Testament. So I just think it's something that men do or women do, and we live with the results, which have always been disastrous, at least in biblical sense. I don't know about modern day times.
Okay, and then can I do a follow-up question with Sam and Tanner?
Please do.
If we have time. Okay, so when you guys brought up, I saw Sam, I don't know, from at least seeing it online, it looked like she got kind of tricky when they're talking about the male and female promiscuity. And I'm just curious to ask them that they said they were atheists, but not the hardcore atheists, more of there's not enough evidence, right? Is what you guys said?
What would be a more hardcore type of atheist than we are? Just curious.
Well, I think I think Shawn talked about it earlier when he said he's met people that said there is no God for sure. And
Well, that's
there's a difference between that and saying, I haven't seen evidence for God, so we'll see. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like regardless of whether someone says, I don't believe there's a God or I don't believe there's a God for sure, that's just like the language they're using, right? I mean, they, just like how a theist can say, I believe there's a God or there's a God for sure, it doesn't really make a difference either way in like what the reality is. That's just their perspective, like the strength of language they're willing to use. So I don't necessarily think I'm any different from a hardcore atheist in the sense that like we both just simply don't believe there's a God. Sorry if this is getting too deep into this and you don't want this answer.
Yeah.
But
well, this is
I mean, I'm
just
not.
kind of a preface, because I actually wanted to ask about like your guys' stance on evolution in biology. Like, do you believe the full Darwin's evolution, like we came from apes and evolved over time from Africa?
Yes, 100%. And a book
Okay.
I would like to recommend to you and anybody, because it's my favorite book in the world, is called
That's even
Sapiens.
better, because before you were saying, you were talking about that the stigma of people saying women not bonding after promiscuous sex is social. But I think there is a lot of psychology, evolutionary psychology, that would say that's true on a biological level through evolution.
Sam, I'm going to let Samantha respond to that. We are way over time, but I really appreciate your call in, my friend.
Oh yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead and wrap that up.
Sorry, what was the question?
I have no idea.
I think he was, yeah, I don't know.
Look, at part of the problem with the discussion on sex with men and women and gender is I'm old school and I'm not educated on some of the things now, and so I bring that to the table and I'll stick my foot in it. But you know, I think we covered it pretty well, and I really appreciate it, you guys, for being here on the show, and really appreciate your honesty and your transparency and being willing to come and share this with us. And maybe we can have you back after all the flames come at me and everything else, and go from there. So thanks so much.
Bless
Yeah,
you. This
thank
feels like the
you.
best
Seriously.
televangelist experience we could hope for.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah.
Thanks.
More Christ-like than Christians we ever meet.
Oh, thank you. That's thanks so much. And remember, Christy Johnson's a week from Thursday. Go to her event and check out ZelphOnTheShelf.com, and especially on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
And just keep the conversations going, because as they pointed out, you know, this is where the love starts to come out, and we can start to understand people a little bit better. We'll see you next week here on Heart of the Matter.